my name is Peter Raymer, and today we're going to look at how to write a runnable class, otherwise called a job. They are usually written for a couple different purposes. They're used by developers to quickly write X++ code, and they're also written to run a specific set of code to maybe correct data in a way that you couldn't do it through the user interface. But before we kind of go into those details, I want to show you what is a runnable class and why you might want to use it. Maybe you've heard of these before. Hopefully in this video you'll learn a little deeper of how and when we use them and how are runnable classes different than normal classes. So let's dive in. Really, a runnable class is the same thing as any other class, but by convention, it's going to have a main method. The main method is what the system is going to look for and call first when a class is called directly. There are other classes that can have a main method, such as batch jobs. If I search for this class called MCR FTC event process batch, I can go in it and see that this has a main method. And what this main method does is instantiates this class and actually calls the run operation on this class and performs some action. So you definitely can have other classes with a main method. And so really when we talk about a runnable class or a job, it's really about the intended purpose of what makes it different than another class. The intended purpose for a runnable job should either be to test out some code. You're running as a developer and you have no plans of actually checking in that code or promoting it forward to a production environment. You're just using it as a place to experiment. Instead of having to create a whole other form with a menu item and a button that when you click that button you override the clicked method, you put some X++ code in there and test writing some code. We can do that much simpler by creating a runnable class, otherwise known as a job. So that's one reason. Sometimes we also write these to create or fix data. So let's start from the beginning and actually show you a runnable class and how we create one. So this is one here, but if I go up to an open Visual Studio, I can create a brand new project. I can say new project. I'm going to select finance and operations as my project and click next. You can also search for it in this template if you haven't recently picked it, as long as you're in a development environment. Then you select next. Here we can give it a name. You can give it whatever name you want, runnable class, and then we can click create. I've gone ahead and done this already, so I'll actually just cancel out of this screen. Next, in order to add or create this runnable class and job, we can right click on the project and then select add and then new item. So this is the same way we would add a new form or a table or a class. Select add new item, and then we're going to select Dynamics 365 items from this left side, and now we see all the different types of items that we can create. We could create a class, or we can scroll down and then there's specifically one called runnable class parentheses job. These are actually almost the same thing. The only difference is when I select runnable class job, it's going to generate that main method for me. So let's go ahead and take a look. I'm just going to call this test runnable class 2. And then I'm going to say add. And this is going to go ahead and add this new class to my project. It's going to name that class what I typed into the name field. And then it's gone ahead and generated these 3 lines of code to create this main method for me. Again, this is no different than any other class. I could come in here, say add new item, and then just scroll up and pick class, and I could say test class 2, click add, and this is just going to create a blank empty class for me. I could come in here and type in or paste in the main method, and it would really be no different. If I look at the properties of these are both just classes that can run. The only difference by me picking that runnable class is that it's generated this main method for me. So let's switch back to here. Now, once I have my runnable class, I can write whatever code I want. Very often, these are just used to experiment and try out some code. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to type info, parentheses, then quote, and type hello world as a classic example, and then quote, parentheses, semicolon, and then I can hit save. So this info statement is like a print statement. It will print to our browser this message to the screen. And I can write many other things. I can declare variables, I can write select statements, query tables, whatever I need to kind of experiment. And then later, once I figure out and make sure my code's running the way I want it to, I could move it into a regular class, and I could put it in a method, and I can call that method from, say, a clicked button on a form, or another batch job, or a method on a table, or a report, any of the normal ways that the system would normally call methods on a class. Again, the purpose of a runnable class or job is to really just either experiment with code or correct some data. So let's look at how we would actually run this and then go from there. So there's two ways I can run this class. One is I can run it through Visual Studio, and the second way is I can run it through a browser. So let's start with the Visual Studio way. Once I'm in Visual Studio, I can right click on the class that I want to run, and I can select Set as Startup Object. That's going to tell Visual Studio to actually run this class when I click the Start button. And specifically, it's looking for a method named main. If I were to rename this method, the system would error because it wouldn't find this main method. So I need to have a static void main method, and I need this to be the set as the startup object. Once I mark it as the startup object, it actually makes this class bold to visually let me know this is the class that's going to run in case I have multiple like I do now. So that's great. Now I can click Start, and the system's going to go ahead and compile the code that's in my project. And as long as I don't have any errors, it's going to open a browser and actually run this runnable class / job. Okay. The system has run my job, and it has printed out my message, as I can see right here in the blue text. I can see from this text right here, it says class test runnable class 2 completed. That tells me what class it actually ran and that it's finished running. So we're all set. If it had been updating some data or inserting or deleting some data, that data would have been updated at the time that the job finished. So I can click Stop now. We just looked at how we run this job running it through Visual Studio. But what happens in a production environment or another Tier 2 environment where we can't actually remote into the back-end machine and run Visual Studio? How do we run this runnable class or job? If it was a batch job, we would actually have a menu item like this one over here. That menu item would have certain security objects tied to it. Then we could go to the very front end of D365, click on that menu item, and it would run the main method in that class, and we'd be done. But really the purpose of a runnable class job when you create these and actually do promote them to production is to really run them once. We kind of want them to be hidden. We don't want an average user to accidentally click on it. And usually we are writing them with a specific record in mind. Oftentimes we're even hard coding the rec ID, which is the unique record or field on every table, to say, hey, correct this one record, do it once and never again. So we really don't want all of our runnable class jobs showing up as menu items. We don't want to put the extra work in of creating menu items and security objects for those. You certainly can, but oftentimes you just promote the job and then you need a user that has the system administrator role to be able to actually call and run this job. But let's look at how that would be done. The way you do it is, first, you're going to open up your D365 environment and you're going to grab this first chunk of information, or really you can even grab the whole URL, and then we really need to make 3 edits to it. Once I'm on this D365 home screen, I can actually grab this URL. So that's really step 1. And then we're going to make a few changes to it and then paste it back in this URL. So I'm going to go ahead and open a notepad just so we can more easily edit this string here. So this first part is the URL to my D365 environment. Yours will look a little different, but it'll have this first part until you get to this first slash. The next thing that you'll have is you'll have a section that looks like this, ampersand CMP. That's the company that you're in. So I'm in the USRT company in a Contoso database. Yours likely will look a little different, where you might have a different company. You can just type in those 4 letters for the company that you want to run into that URL, or you can switch in the drop down here and re-grab the URL. So if you wanted to run it in this company, you would use CNMF in place of that. So for now, I'll leave this alone. But that's kind of the first thing you need to look at, is make sure that you're running this job in the right company and you're looking at the right data. The next thing we need to look at is this section right here, where it says MI equals default dashboard. This really refers to the form that it's running. If you navigate to different forms in the system, you'll see that this part of the URL changes. In our case, we want to run a class, so we need to type in sys class runner. And so that tells the system we're planning on running a class directly. Then the third and kind of last piece that we need to do is we need to type in ampersand CLS equals, and then the name of your class. So in our case, I can see that our class is named Test Runnable Class 2. So I'm going to type in Test Runnable Class 2. Now I have my URL that I can copy and paste back into my browser. So real quick, just to be very clear, this is kind of the format that you want to follow. https:// the URL of your environment, and then question mark. This is where the order doesn't actually matter. You can do the CMP first or second, but CMP equals, replace this with the company that you want this to run into. Then another ampersand, ME equals sysclass runner, ampersand CLS equals the name of your class. So I realize that might be a little confusing and a bunch of steps, but in the end, just start with this format, or do some find and replace with your specific example. Once you have this, you can then go back to your browser, open a new tab if you'd like, and then paste in this string and hit enter. This is then going to run that class directly. We see that it worked, it completed, we see our message displayed. We could do this in a production environment to run our class that might correct or update data. We don't need Visual Studio to run it. All right, so really in recap, you learned about what a runnable class / job is. It's really just a regular class with a main method, but the main difference is the intended purpose. Developers use this to write their own test code. Like you can see here, they also write it to write a one-time process to potentially update, insert, or delete code that you can't do through the user interface. It's highly recommended that you start researching to see if you can correct something using the user interface before you ever run or write a runnable class job. But sometimes there's special cases where you really do need to do this to, say, get a sales order unstuck. You can write that code and you can test it using Visual Studio by making it the startup object, and then later, once you promote this code to a tier 2 test environment or a stage environment or even production, you can use a user that has the system administrator role to actually run that job directly using the URL. You just need to know the correct format. You need to know that you're calling this sysclass runner kind of form, and then you need to know the name of your runnable class, and then you can run it. So these are really helpful. I plan to keep showing you and having you create these runnable class jobs to show you some more cool things that you can do with X++ code. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, click the like button. I also invite you to push the subscribe button as well. If there's other topics you would like to see a video on, please post in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you.